In Western philosophy, people have been trying to figure out who and why we are for a long time. Famous French philosopher Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." So he associated thinking with consciousness and consciousness with being. Interestingly enough, God in the Old Testament is known as I am that I am. Quite different than I think, therefore I am. Thinking has nothing to do with it. God is, with or without thinking, a much more complex being than just something that thinks. In Sufism, it's understood that God is everything, and we essentially do not exist, only God exists. We are told that in order to understand who we are, we have to come to know ourselves. So one of the things we need to come to know about is, what is this mind? What is this thinking process? How does it work? What kind of information does it give us? And how are we intimately or non-intimately involved with this? And how does our involvement with it shape who we are? Some basic questions that we need answers to. Wise men have said, the mind is a tool, and we need to know how to use it. If we don't control it, then it becomes a master. So the mind can either be our servant or become our master, depending on our involvement with the mind. The mind is also driven by desire. We formulate images in our mind, and we formulate an obsessive compulsion towards these images. Either we want them or we don't want them. We want to do away with them. We want to acquire them. We want to possess them. We want things to do, act the way we want them to act. We want control. Desire is about control. Somehow fulfilling your needs in whatever way you can accomplish that fulfillment. Some might say by whatever means necessary. So we have this complex situation going on inside of us, this complex thinking situation. On the most basic level, where the mind becomes our servant, we use it as follows. We read a book and we get instructions from the book on how to do something that's important for us. We then use those instructions to somehow accomplish what we've set out to accomplish. So the mind gathers information for us, and we can then use that information in a logical sequence, again using the mind, to accomplish what we want to accomplish. There are problems. If our desires become so strong, we lose the ability to prioritize what's important and what's not important. So we can come to the point where our desires are greater than even our own self-interest, and we can't tell the difference between what's in our self-interest and what we desire. When this happens, we become a slave to our mind, because we become a slave to our desire, and really difficult circumstances can occur for us because of this obsession. A story that helps to explain this. Once there was a man in Africa hunting monkeys, and he thought he was clever. He thought he would set up a cage, put bananas in the cage, and leave the door open. The monkeys would walk into the cage, take the bananas, or try to take the bananas. He would shut the door on the cage and he would trap them. Well, the monkeys were a little more clever than him. They came with sticks, pushed the bananas out through the bars of the cage, and ran off with the bananas. So he was trying to come up with another way to capture monkeys. And as he was walking through the village near the jungle, he saw these gourds, dried gourds, that had a large bowl and a very thin neck. And he learned something about these gourds from the local people. And what he learned was that if you stuck your hand down the long neck of the gourd and made a fist, you couldn't pull your hand back out. But if you unclenched your fist, you could. And he came up with an idea. These gourds had large bowls. The bowl was actually wider than the bars in his cage. So if you put a gourd on inside the cage, you could take the neck of the gourd and put it through the bars, but the base, the round part of the gourd, wouldn't go through. He dropped bananas into the gourds. The monkeys came by. They stuck their hands in the gourds and grabbed the banana. Problem for the monkey. He couldn't get his hand out of the gourd unless he let go of the banana. But he wouldn't let go of the banana because the monkey was obsessed with the banana. Now all the man who was hunting monkeys had to do was grab the monkeys who were holding on to their bananas. A perfect example of being jailed outside of a cage. In other words, carrying your cage around with you. Why? Because the obsession became so strong that you lose your sense of proportion and you don't understand what kind of danger or problem the obsession is getting you into, because your obsession has, in a very real sense, overcome everything else you can think about. This is often the dilemma that the mind puts us in. When we couple the mind with desire, we set up situations that we no longer control. We become controlled by what? By our own particular bananas. And we all have different bananas. For some people, bananas, food, is the obsession. For some people, money is the obsession. For some people, power is the obsession. For some people, sex is an obsession. For some people, status is an obsession. For some people, titles are an obsession. There are as many different kinds of obsessions available as there are people. Religion can be your obsession. Promulgation of your religion, it can be your obsession. The destruction of infidels can be your obsession. You name it, there can be an obsession about it. So, the mind can either be a tool or it can be a master. And if we don't understand the nature of our mind, we become susceptible to its thinking patterns and its obsessions. And then we become reflexive to what it is that we think about, and we almost act without real wisdom. We act without really understanding why we act the way we act. Another example. Imagine if you had a fish hook in you, and this fish hook is attached to a line which is attached to a fishing pole. And imagine your mind has controls on these fishing poles. Once your mind hits one of the buttons that it controls, that arm goes, this arm goes, your head goes. You get pulled in the direction of your obsession. And you can't control it because now it's become automatic. More importantly, you've accepted this as a reality in your existence, which means to alter the acceptance of that reality, you somehow have to change your own perceptions of things that you've accepted for a very long time. Now, for you who know about fish hooks, you know there's a barb on the way out. So to take a fish hook out hurts more than when you put it in. Well, for us to change our imaginations, for us to become clean of our conceptions is painful. Why? Because we've accepted them as real. And now we have to alter them, which means that we somehow have to backtrack and accept the fact that we have been susceptible to improper information, to inappropriate learnings. We've swallowed them, we've made them part of our being, and now we have to admit to ourselves that we've been fooled, that we've been taken advantage of, that we've been lied to and accepted the lies. Our own sense of self, if that sense of self is wrapped up in the mind, will say, no, it's not true. You're smarter than that. You've always been smarter than that. You haven't been fooled. They're trying to fool you now. Again, the mind backing up its position. So, we need to begin to understand that our mind, left to its own devices, takes positions and influences our entire being based on those positions. And if we try to alter those positions, our mind will fight with us to keep us in stasis, to keep us in the way that we are, essentially under the control of the mind. Now, inside the mind, there is this vast space, except there is no space. Inside the mind, there is everything that we see outside of ourselves. It gets recreated in there. But it really doesn't exist in there. All that exists in there is an imagination, and then we work the intertwinings of that imagination. This is what's known as illusion. The intertwinings of our thought patterns to create situations out of what we see, our imaginings, are illusion. We think they're real, but their reality, at the very best, is limited. Let's take, for instance, the things that we see. How long will they last? How long will this desk that I'm sitting behind last? How long will the people that I've met in my life last? How long is the term given to these things within creation? Our mind deals only with these things that have terms. And that's why we say, or that's why the West said, I think, therefore I am. What happens after thinking stops? Is it over? God is, I am that I am. Thinking has nothing to do with it. We need to revert from understanding this limited vision of things to understand this vision of things that is without limit, without conditions, without imaginings. But we can't imagine it with our mind, because our mind is limited by its own imagination. And when we try to go beyond that which can be imagined, we can't do it with our mind. And if we think that we are our mind, that we are limited by our consciousness, and that consciousness is limited by how far the mind can go, we've limited our ability to understand. We need to bypass this trap. And the bypassing of this trap begins when we ask certain questions, when we come to certain conclusions, when we begin to understand that we've been chasing things, and this chase has become so important in our existence. And we finally ask the question, is that all there is? Or is there something more? Is there something my mind is incapable of answering? Is there something that I can't accomplish by just chasing wildly my desires? Is there another way for me to live? When we begin to ask these questions, we begin to enter the path that seeks the truth. May it come to be that each of us enter this path. May it come to be that we begin to get answers on this path. May God hear our pleas and answer them. Assalamu alaikum.